This is the second lecture on the same topic, Jinnah's secularism to Zia's Islamization. And I would like to share one thing with you, which has been bothering me since the lecture one. Unfortunately, I left all my reading package modules and notes in my office, and I cannot access it anymore. So now for lecturing, I am going to the original sources and relying upon my memory that what sections were there as I have the lecture plan before me, fortunately. So it must be a great surprise for you that here is Arfa Sayyida looking at the book again and again and almost appearing, reading it. But bear with it, these are abnormal times, and whenever soon we'll meet in ordinary circumstances, I think our teaching will become the same thing, which cannot be, let me tell you, without the presence of you right before me. Islamization and basically it was the need for politics of legitimization, and it almost remained for 2 decades, 1969 to 1988. Pakistan's successive leaders in this era, from Yahya Khan, Zade Bhutto and Zia, they all would resort to Islam in order to legitimize their rule, or more abruptly, I may say, to form tactical alliances. Ayub Khan's successor was General Yahya. He was the first head of a state to seek the support of fundamentalists. The Jamaat-e-Islami, racked by internal tensions since it had compromised itself in the eyes of the purest leaders, by backing Fatima Jinnah, responded favorably to the signals it was reviving for their opinion, and they were receiving it from Yahya Khan. The Jamaat-e-Islami, whose Islami Jamiyat-e-Tulaba had already become known for its robust cultural policing of Pakistani campuses, honed its technique of intimidation. The Jamaat-e-Islami also tried to counter the PPP on ideological grounds, and Islamic Jamiyat-e-Tulaba was very active in this. But at the same time, Jamaat-e-Islami also backed the army's crackdown on the movement of Bangladesh, especially when this IJT, Islami Jamaat-e-Tulaba militants were killed on the Dhaka campus. The first association between the military and the Islamists resulted in a double fiasco. Not only that Bengalis got their independence, but the PPP came to power in an election that revealed just how narrow the basis of the JI and JUI and the JUP, Jamaat-e-Islami, Jamaat-ul-Ulama Islam and Jamaat-e-Ulama Pakistan. If we see about Zade Bhutto's version of Islam, and it played a very important role in Bhutto's political discourse. It was basically that he came up that Islam is our faith, democracy is our polity, socialism is our economy. So it was a recipe for everything, but it did not really work that well. Bhutto thus capitalized the Islamic sentiments to rebuild the country's unity excuse me. The 1973 Constitution changed the name of the Advisory Council for Islamic Ideology to Council of Islamic Ideology and put it in charge of carrying out the task of making laws according to Sharia. More importantly, Article 260 defined for the tests for the first time that who was a Muslim and who was not. Among the non-Muslims, in addition to Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists and Parsis, there were also Ahmadis. At the same time, however, Bhutto continued to pursue one of Ayub Khan's goals, the subjugation of alternative religious centers of power by the state. So, Bhutto pursued the process initiated by Ayub Khan. Bhutto, by proclaiming that the Sharia was now the law of country in 1977, had laid the groundwork for General Zia-ul-Haq, whose rule in this domain was, as in others, differed from the previous regimes more in nature than in degree. And the Zia-ul-Haq's mind of Islamization, as he gave this word, the term that was used by him, he took power in 1977, and his social background should also be taken into account, as he represented a new category of officers from the Punjabi conservative lower middle class. He was a son of a partition, his family having migrated from East Punjab. But beyond that, Zia used Islam in the framework of his political strategy. After coming to power through a military coup, Zia thus sought to legitimize his authority. First started by General Zia, the first thing he started was Islamization of the legal system, where judicial reforms gave new weight to Islamic legal system alongside the existing civil courts and the special tribunals set up by the regime and peopled with military staff. And he made Sharia benches, and he was very much concerned about these Sharia benches. They might become power centers on the basis of their Islamic legitimacy. So the main feature of judicial reforms, which was known as the Nizam-e-Islam program, lay in the enforcement of hudud punishments. Islamic provisions newly introduced in the penal code provided for new punishments for three types of crimes: theft, sarqa, extramarital sexual relations, zina, including adultery, and the consumption of alcohol or drugs, sharab. The most common punishment was lashing, whose practical implementation was explained in the surprisingly detailed execution of the punishment of whipping, Ordinance 1979. And then he made some educational reforms. They flowed basically from the judicial reforms, as for instance, a Sharia department was set up at Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad. Interestingly, the chairman of National Committee for Dini Madaris in charge of the survey, AWJ Halepota, had already been involved in a similar task in 1961. So this was like a continuity. In Halepota, in his report, recommended not only the inclusion of modern subjects, but also more uniformity among Dini Madaris statutes and modes of functioning. In fact, ulama benefit more from the policy than the administration, which never managed to control the Dini Madaris. While in 1960s the number of Dini Madaris students remained nearly the same in West Pakistan, it increased by 119% between 1971 and 1978, within 8 years, and jumped by 160% in only 4 years, in 1979 to 83. And according to Jamal Malik, between 1978 and 1985, the Deobandi Dini Madaris produced the largest number of Maulanas 3,530. This becomes as 52.6% of all the ulamas. The expansion of Dini Madaris was fostered by support from abroad. Sunni and Shia institutions were aided by Saudi Arabia and Iran respectively. And Iran, after Khomeini's revolution in 1979, fought a kind of proxy war for the leadership of Muslim world. And Riyadh especially supported for Ahl Hadith schools, which in some cases even employed very well paid Saudi teachers. By 1988, when Zia left the scene, the number of Dini Madaris has increased by some 12,000 units. In retrospect, the growing importance of these schools is probably the most significant aspect of Zia's Islamization policy. The tax reforms came up again. Zakat was made compulsory and it was to be deducted from the bank accounts on the 1st of Ramzan, despite of the fact whether the amount has been there for a year or not, as per Islamic injunction. The religious right turned towards military for support, and the Jamaat Islami in particular was able to deepen its strategy of infiltrating the state apparatus, first focusing on the intellectual strategy of infiltrating the state apparatus, and this is how he first focused on the intellectual elite, reflected in the founding of the Islami Jamiyat-e-Tulaba. It now extended to the army and to the administration. Zia's Islamization policy, unprecedented since the birth of Pakistan, had multiple and sometimes unintentional consequences in Pakistan society. But one more thing very interesting, that Zia did not want religious leaders whom he despised to gain too much influence. He wanted to Islamize for the legitimation of his politics, but not the religious leaders. Over the years between 1947 to 1988, the space of about 4 decades, Pakistan's relationship to Islam underwent considerable changes, yet with a certain degree of continuity. The trauma of 1971 partition fostered a parallel evolution by making a reference to Islam as Jinnah intended it. And the third thing was that in the late 1970s, Zia brought about a change in the situation as much due to his personal inclination as his need for legitimation. He who had come to power in a still more illegitimate fashion than the previous regimes, but the Islamization that implemented had 2 additional elements of complexity. One, it was in the line with Ayub Khan's and Bhutto's efforts, and but the Islamization that Zia implemented had 2 additional elements of complexity, as I said earlier. And these complexities, Zia's Islamization, the second thing was policy on, can only be understood when replaced in the context of the war in Afghanistan, in which Pakistan endeavored to exploit the strike force of jihadis groups to spread its sphere of influence. So, here we see that the nation and the Pakistani society, under the authorities of religious leaders, can control the Islamist ideas, ideologies, practices, and they have proven to be largely illusory, especially after the war in Afghanistan against the Soviets. Thank you.